I knew the moment their hands tightened on the back of my wheelchair. People assume that at 78, your senses dull like old tools left too long in a drawer. Mine never did. I felt every finger gripping the handles and every tremor in the wooden boards as they rolled me toward the lake behind our small coastal town in Maine. There was no warning, no pause, just a low whisper saying, "A little closer," and then the sudden force of a hard shove. The world tipped forward. Cold water rushed over my chest, my shoulders, my face. I sank fast, my dress dragging me down, my hair floating out like a dark halo. Above the surface, their voices drifted through the water. Calm, certain, she drowned. Now we get the 11 million. Not my name, not worry, not remorse, only money. They thought the lake would silence everything. They thought age had softened me into someone who would slip quietly out of their way. They forgot that I grew up on the Atlantic, where storms teach you how to fight for breath and tides teach you how to move with purpose. Even now, when my legs ache and a cane waits by my bed, my body remembers water. I twisted free of the chair, pushed off the weight of the dress, and angled myself sideways until I reached the shadow beneath the pier. When my fingers brushed the rough barnacled post, something inside me sharpened. These were the people I had forgiven, supported, and trusted for years, and this was the way they chose to repay me. They underestimated the wrong old woman. That would be their final mistake. I stayed hidden beneath the pier, the shadows wrapping around me while their footsteps faded down the dock. The water clung to my skin like ice, numbing my arms and tightening my breath, but I held still long enough to hear every word they thought the lake would swallow. Trent's sharp voice came first, brisk and impatient. Josh's shaky breathing followed, a nervous rhythm I had heard since he was a boy. And then my daughter Claire, silent. Always silent when it mattered most. She sank fast. Camera won't pick it up. It's done. They spoke about me as if I were a core finally crossed off a list. They never looked back. They never imagined I might still be alive, clinging to the underside of the dock like a barnacle the sea refused to claim. But I remembered something they didn't. Last spring, the marina installed new wide-angle security cameras. They overlooked every dock on weekends, recording constantly. They never paid attention to details that didn't benefit them. I always did. Once their voices disappeared, I pushed away from the pier and began the slow, punishing swim toward shore. My limbs felt heavy, each movement burning with cold, but mud eventually met my palms and gave me something solid to hold. Evening light stretched across the water, calm and ordinary, as if nothing monstrous had happened. Teenagers laughed on the far bank. Dragonflies skimmed the surface. I rose, soaked and shaking, and began the long walk home. Every step felt like shedding the last remnants of the life they expected me to leave behind at the bottom of the lake. By the time I reached my front porch, the sun had slipped behind the pines, leaving only a pale wash of light across the yard. Water dripped from my hair and clothes, pooling on the wooden steps as I steadied myself against the railing. I must have looked like a woman pulled straight from the lake's memory, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. Inside, the house met me with its familiar quiet. No scent of dinner, no voices. No signs anyone had rushed over to pretend concern. Of course they hadn't. They were already planning their alibis, not my rescue. I closed the door and felt the tremor in my hands, not from fear but from the shock settling into my bones. I peeled off my wet cardigan, each movement stiff and careful, and sat on the entryway bench until my breath evened out. In the kitchen, I set the kettle on the stove. The small, ordinary act steadied me. When the water clicked off, I held the warm mug between my palms, letting the heat seep into my fingers. I did not drink it. I just needed something real to anchor myself. A car rolled slowly past my window. Trent's headlights. He didn't stop. He was checking for police, not checking on me. As the house settled into its nighttime creaks, a deeper truth settled with it. For years, I had forgiven too quickly and spoken up too rarely. I had kept peace that only protected the people willing to harm me. Tonight, something cracked open. Not fear, not grief, clarity. They thought the lake finished me, but this was only the beginning. I did not sleep. I lay on my side, watching the faint crack in the ceiling my late husband, Frank, always promised to fix. He never did. After he passed, I left it untouched. Some things stay unfixed because they remind you of a life that mattered. Around 4 a.m, when the sky turned that strange blue between night and dawn, I pushed myself upright. My joints protested, but staying in bed only let fear settle deeper. I turned on the lamp, its warm light spreading across the room like a quiet reassurance. On the wall hung photos of the people who had shaped my life. Claire at 12, gap-toothed and smiling. Josh is a young boy leaning against my shoulder, and Frank, sunburned and proud, holding a fishing rod the summer before his injury changed everything. They all looked so innocent in those frames, before time hardened them, before money twisted what was left of us. In the kitchen, I reached for my old address book. Its pages were soft from years of use. Frank's handwriting still filled a few lines, pressed deep as if he wanted the ink to survive forever. Beside his name sat a number I had not dialed in a decade, the number of his attorney, Mark Ellis. If anyone could help me rebuild control, it was him. But not yet. Not while they still believed I was dead. People reveal the most when they feel safe in their lies. I set the book aside and stepped out into the cold morning air. My legs trembled, but they held. Today would not be for confrontation. Today would be for reclaiming everything they thought I would never see again. By mid-morning, the tremble in my legs had faded into something steadier, not comfort but resolve. I dressed carefully, choosing plain trousers, a thick sweater, and the brown coat Frank bought me on our last anniversary. It still carried a hint of cedar, a scent that reminded me I had once been loved without conditions. The bank sat on the corner of Main Street, a modest building with clean windows and a lemon-polished scent that never changed. The tellers had known me for decades. They greeted me with warm politeness tinged with the assumption that older women only came in with simple questions. I asked to speak with my financial manager, Angela. When she ushered me into her glass-walled office, her expression softened with concern. "You look pale," she said gently. "Are you feeling all right?" I nodded and sat down. "I need to review every account, every automatic payment, every authorization my family has access to." She blinked, surprised, but began pulling up my records. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was the tapping of her keyboard. Then her face tightened. "Miss Brooks, are you aware of these transactions?" She turned the screen toward me. There they were, transfers to unfamiliar accounts, insurance payments I never approved, loan repayments tied to my name, subscriptions I had never heard of. All signed under a power of attorney document Trent convinced me to sign 3 years ago. I kept my voice steady. "I want it revoked today, and I want every access point he has removed." Angela studied me, searching for hesitation. She found none. "We can begin the paperwork," she said. As I signed each form, a strange calm swept over me. For years, my signature had been used to drain me. Today, it was the tool that stitched my life back together. When the final page was done, Angela exhaled. "You've just cut him off completely." I nodded. It was long overdue. It was early afternoon when I heard the slow crunch of gravel outside my window. Not hurried, not panicked. Just the kind of walk a man takes when he is used to collecting favors from people too tired to argue. Josh stood on my porch, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. For a moment he didn't knock. He just glanced around, checking the driveway and the street, as if making sure no one saw him. The same nervous habit he had as a boy, only heavier now. When I opened the door, his eyes widened. He recovered quickly, but the shock was there. "Aunt Evelyn," he said, "I came by earlier. You weren't home." I stepped aside only enough for him to understand he was not being invited in. "What do you need, Josh?" He swallowed hard. "It's about the business deal I told you about. I just need a little help to stay in it. A small loan, just until things settle." I thought of the doc, his voice echoing in my memory, shaky but eager. She sank fast. "No, Josh," I said softly. He blinked. "What? After everything you always said." "I know what I said, but things have changed, and I won't be helping you anymore." Anger flickered across his face, quick and sharp. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. I held his gaze. "Not this time." He backed away slowly, the gravel crunching under each reluctant step, until he finally turned and walked off. When I closed the door, my heart was steady. Saying no had taken me 78 years, but it felt like freedom. The next morning arrived with a cold that settled deep in my bones, but my mind was wide awake. One thought threaded through every breath I took. The camera. The one they were so certain would not see anything. The one they never bothered to look for. I dressed slowly, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and drove toward the marina. The lot was nearly empty, the boats rocking gently in the quiet morning tide. The office was a small weathered building with peeling paint and a fogged front window. Inside, a young clerk sat half asleep over a mug of coffee. When I asked for footage from Dock 3, he blinked as if he had misheard me. "Are you a boat owner, ma'am?" "No, but I was involved in an incident." That made him straighten. He called for the manager, a woman named Rosa, whose face carried the calm focus of someone who had spent a lifetime around unpredictable water. She led me to the back room lined with monitors. Before she pressed play, she asked gently, "Are you sure you want to see this?" I nodded. There it was, me in the wheelchair, Trent behind me, Josh a few steps back, Claire standing just far enough away to claim innocence. The shove, the fall, the way they walked off without a single glance at the water. Rosa let out a low breath. "This is serious." I kept my voice steady. "I need a copy." She downloaded the footage onto a flash drive and pressed it into my hand. "If you need help, you come straight to me," she said. I slipped the drive into my coat pocket. It felt small, but it held the truth they thought the lake would hide. I did not drive straight home from the marina. The flash drive in my coat pocket felt heavier than it should, as if it carried every betrayal from the past few years packed into its plastic shell. Instead, I drove to the small office above the hardware store, the one belonging to Mark Ellis, my late husband's attorney. The stairs were steep, and I had to pause twice to catch my breath, but I made it to the landing. The door was cracked open. When I pushed it wider, Mark looked up from a cluttered desk, his glasses sliding down his nose. For a moment, he simply stared. "Evelyn Brooks," he said, standing quickly. "Are you hurt?" I sat down before my knees gave out. "No, just older than I was yesterday." He waited quietly, the way only someone who has seen people unravel knows how to wait. I reached into my coat and placed the flash drive on his desk. His eyes sharpened. "What is this?" "Evidence," I said, "of an attempted murder." He did not interrupt while I told him everything. The doc. The voices. The financial documents I had found. When I finished, he leaned back, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Good Lord, Evelyn, your own family." He closed his eyes for a long moment, then asked the question that mattered most. "What do you want to do?" "I want control back," I said, "of my money, my house, my name." He nodded, already reaching for a stack of forms. "Then we start with protection. New financial power of attorney, naming someone you trust. A trust to shield your assets. Layers they cannot touch." I said the only name that made sense, my granddaughter Sophie. He smiled, a solid choice. When he locked the flash drive in his office safe, a weight lifted from my chest. Not relief, something cleaner, the beginning of getting my life back. Late that evening, just as the sky turned the color of cooled ash, I heard a gentle, familiar knock. 3 even taps, the kind of knock that belonged to someone who never wanted to startle me. Sophie stood on the porch with a tote bag hanging off her shoulder, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Grandma," she said softly, "you scared me today. I stopped by after work and you were not home. That never happens." She stepped inside without rushing, letting her eyes travel over my face the way a nurse checks for hidden bruises. "You look tired." "I am tired," I said, "but I am also awake in ways I have not been in years." She unpacked a container of soup and a warm loaf of bread from my favorite bakery. The simple kindness of it softened something inside me. We ate together in the kitchen, the house growing warmer with each quiet moment. After dinner, I rested my hands on the table. "Sophie," I said gently, "I made you my financial agent today, through Mark Ellis." Her eyes widened, not with greed but with worry. "Me? Are you sure?" "You are the only one I trust to stand beside me, not above me." She swallowed, blinking hard. "I have always been on your side, Grandma, even when I did not know how to say it." Before she left, she placed her hands on my shoulders. "Whatever is happening, you will not face it alone." When the door closed behind her, the house did not feel empty. For the first time in a long while, it felt supported. The next afternoon, I heard the roar of an engine tearing up my driveway, not the sound of worry. The sound of a man who feels power slipping through his fingers. Trent did not bother knocking. I opened the door before he could raise his fist. He stepped inside without waiting for permission, his face flushed, his tie crooked, his voice already trembling with anger. "What did you do, Evelyn? My access is gone. The accounts are frozen. I could not pay the property insurance or move any funds. Nothing works." I watched him pace the living room as if it still belonged to him. For years I let him walk through my home as though he were doing me a favor by managing my life. Not today. "You cannot just cut us out," he said, pointing at me as if lecturing a child. "Claire thinks you are confused. She said you have been acting paranoid." "She also told me she was sorry," I replied quietly. "It seems she has more than one story prepared." He stopped pacing, his jaw clenched. "What is that supposed to mean?" I met his eyes. It means I remember everything that happened at the lake. A flicker of panic crossed his face. You fell, he said quickly. You must have slipped. You are remembering it wrong. I let the silence widen before I spoke. There is footage, Trent. From the marina. Wide angle, motion activated. The color drained from his face. There is no camera facing the dock, he whispered. There is now. For a moment, he looked like a man staring at the edge of a cliff he thought he owned. We can fix this, he said suddenly. We can talk like a family. We stopped being a family when you walked away from the water. He backed toward the door, breath unsteady. You will not get away with this. I already have, I said. He left the door hanging open. I closed it myself and slid the lock into place with a steady hand. The police came the next morning, pulling into my driveway with their lights off, as if they already sensed the weight of what they were walking into. Sergeant Miller and Officer James stepped out, their expressions careful, professional but curious. They told me they had received a call from Trent, who claimed I was confused and making alarming accusations. I invited them inside and set the flash drive Mark had secured for me on the dining table. Before you ask any questions, I said, you should watch this. Officer James plugged it into his tablet. The room filled with the quiet hum of the recording. None of us spoke while the footage played. The wheelchair, the shove, my body hitting the water, the three of them walking away. When it ended, Sergeant Miller exhaled slowly. Mrs. Brooks, this is not confusion. This is attempted homicide. Their report moved quickly. Too quickly for Trent and Josh to adjust their stories. By the afternoon, the officers returned to let me know that both men were in custody. Trent for attempted murder and financial exploitation. Josh for fraudulent loans and accessory charges. Claire was not arrested. Her silence was a moral failure, not a criminal one, though it weighed heavier on me than anything the men had done. That evening she came to my house with eyes swollen from crying. She stood on the porch like a stranger unsure if she had the right to knock. Mom, she whispered, I did not know how to stop him. I was scared. I froze. Fear explains a moment, I said gently, but it cannot excuse a choice. She broke down, apologizing over and over. I listened, but I did not reach for her. Forgiveness, if it comes, will take time. Some wounds close slowly. When she left, the house felt quiet again, not empty, just honest. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a quieter rhythm. Court dates were scheduled, statements were taken, and Mark handled the constant stream of paperwork with the steady patience of someone who had shepherded many people through storms far rougher than mine. But inside my home, everything felt different. The air no longer carried the weight of someone else's control. The silence no longer felt like abandonment, it felt like space. One afternoon, as I stood at the kitchen window watching leaves scatter across the yard, Mark mentioned something almost in passing. You know, Evelyn, you do not have to stay in this house if it feels heavy. Fresh starts are not only for the young. The idea lingered. Days later, Sophie drove me along the coast where the Atlantic stretched out wide and open. We stopped at a small cottage tucked behind a row of wind-shaped pines. The paint was chipped. The porch creaked. The roof sagged just slightly. But the moment I stepped inside, the air smelled of salt and sunlight, and something in me loosened. I bought it 2 days later. I packed lightly, choosing only the pieces of my life that still felt like mine. Frank's old watch. The teapot with the chipped handle. A quilt I stitched the winter he passed. The rest could stay behind. Some objects hold memories worth carrying. Others hold memories that keep us from moving forward. The first morning in the cottage, I opened all the windows and let the sea breeze sweep through the rooms. I made tea and carried it to the porch, listening to waves break somewhere beyond the dunes. For the first time since the lake, my breath felt full and steady. Claire visits now and then. She is trying, slowly untangling herself from the person she let her husband shape her into. I do not offer quick forgiveness, but I do offer the door, left open just enough for her to walk through when she is ready. If my story reaches someone who feels trapped, overlooked, or silenced, I hope it reminds them of this. You are allowed to take your life back, no matter your age, no matter who tries to convince you otherwise. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs it, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Your voice matters more than you think.